So today we're just, and I don't know how long this will take. I mainly, since we're talking about diction, I wanted to talk a little bit about what a difference it makes, especially when we read poems in translation. And so the truth is there are quite a few poets who are very well known around the world, and yet their poetry, I mean, most of us, we can't just learn Chinese or learn Spanish or learn Russian or learn Old English just so that we can read the poem in its original language. So sometimes we have to go, to the translation, even things like the big epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Well, there are always people who you teach it, and yet if you got all of that, it's all going to be in translation. Of course. I mean, Beowulf, even though it's in English that's actually just about the same time period as this poem. So if you ever want to read about Beowulf and Grendel and everything, you're going to probably have to read it in translation. I got I got to actually study medieval English. Well, actually, it's early English, early modern. It's funny because, a lot of people say Shakespeare is, oh, well, because it's Old English. Well, it's actually not. It is
It's
early
modern.
modern English. And I'll just put that. That's what it's termed to be, because it's not even Middle English. Middle English is like Geoffrey Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales, which you could probably read in its real original wording. You just have to kind of get used to it. But Old English is even earlier, of course. And so this is was originally written in Old English. And we're going to move back and forth between the two versions because I want to show you a couple of things that are just a little bit different. I know that from the journals, a lot of people said that they could pick out some words that were alike, but when they heard it spoken, they got more of the feeling of it, but they understood less. Like they would never have known it was English if they just listened to it. And the truth is, what's happened from the time of the Wanderer until now, because it's been over a millennium since the Wanderer was really, that we know of, that the Wanderer was being passed around orally, and it would have been spoken orally first. Most people couldn't read anyway, so they would have passed it along, maybe even for a few centuries, and then eventually it would have been written down. But in this case, though, I wanted you to kind of hear what it sounded like differently, but I'm going to show you a few things so you can see, hey, wait, this is actually English. And so, and then we're going to get to the meaning of the poem. But I want to talk about diction first, because diction matters. Honestly, the language matters. And I still remember I was teaching, the Lament for Ignacio Mejias. And it's about a bullfighter who was gored, famous bullfighter in Spain, who was gored and died in the arena. And so Lorca, a poet at the time in Spain, wrote about it, the Lament for Ignacio Mejias. And he started the poem out, and it's in translation, it just says, it was 5 in the afternoon. It was exactly 5 in the afternoon. And it repeats that a few places. And you think, okay, so what? Well, that's in English. It was 5 in the afternoon. In Spanish, it's a las 5 de la tarde. A las 5 en punto de la tarde. So it's a totally different sound. And there's no way to translate it into English and capture that sound. So it's just a las 5 de la tarde. And so now you can hear the rhythms in it that you can't transcribe into English. There's no way to do it. So translators have a hard time making sense of, in our language, what other languages are trying to say, because some expressions change, words don't mean the same thing, all this other kind of stuff. And a lot of times, like even in this is English to English. And yet Old English used to be a language which was what they call genitive. It's not by word order that you figure out the meaning of a sentence. It's by endings in the words. So Latin is exactly the same way, although that's not the case for most of the Latin derivatives like Spanish and French and Portuguese. And so that's the same way today. I mean, High German is still genitive. It's still just by word endings. You can turn the you can actually move the words all around in the sentence and they mean exactly the same thing. English does not work that way. So if I say the boy threw the ball, that's a very different sentence than the ball threw the boy, because we don't have the word endings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. But I mean, obviously you can see, and I had you guys read this first, so you kind of knew what he was talking about. And there are a few words that he doesn't translate, like weird. And I'm going to look at some, I actually should get my, I'm going to see if I have my Old English dictionary in here. Because I use it for, I have a series of books and I use Old English with it. So a lot of times I don't keep it here in the office and I don't have it. So I'll just look it up for a second. Let's see. But the truth is most of these words, a lot of them are actually just, they have kind of a different spelling. And weird is actually one of the, some people picked out that word, that it's in both versions. Well, and it's actually, it's in Germanic mythology, and it is an Old English goddess of fate. So weird is like fate. And really, you know, some translators would just translate it with a capital. Fate is fully fixed. But in this case, weird is a goddess. And so it's actually naming that goddess instead. He chose to leave it that way. And so, and some of this is dialogue. So you can even see the quote marks, you know, often alone, blah, 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 I feel this way, and da, 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 da. And so it's kind of a monologue. Well, if you go to the original, you'll notice that they put in dialogue marks. They did, that's actually not original. They don't, like Beowulf doesn't actually have dialogue marks like that. That is actually an 18th century construction. We didn't have any dialogue before then. It just kind of ran all together. Then the 18th century, they said, wait a second, okay, spelling needs to be normal and regularized. And we need to have very precise grammar and punctuation, and we need to put all these rules into writing. And that's when we started with the whole grammar books and everything that are the bane of many poor English students' existence. But they were trying to essentially quantify the language. And they did that, and a lot of French does it, you know, a lot of things. So, but I want to go through with the original and just show you a few things. There are some letters that we don't have. Oh, I didn't even see your chat text. Yes, I mean, it means the goddess of fate, but yes, it means fate. And so, and notice how weird is spelled the same way, because we don't have, there's no, like the belief in the goddess kind of disappears. Most of the Germanic paganism, the pagan gods and goddesses, and that includes, I mean, several different groups. So the Norse gods and goddesses are different, you know, but they have all, you know, the only reason we know who Thor is, Thor, Odin, Freya, and Loki, are because there's the whole Marvel series, you know. Otherwise we wouldn't even, they'd be, who's Thor, you know. But the truth is Thor, and I mean, Thor still has an influence today on what we do. For instance, at Christmas, we decorate a Christmas tree, and that's in honor of the god Thor. And putting greenery on our mantles and stuff like that, that's also in honor of the god Thor, because that was the fir tree was his tree. And so at winter, during Winterfest or Yule, which it became later, and in certain cultures that I mean, there are some Christmas traditions that include the Yule log, which is a pagan tradition, but they kind of all melded it together. In the same way that, like in Easter, you know, we have the eggs and the little bunnies and stuff like that. And yeah, the Norse mythology it has some strange stuff, and it ends, you know, it's kind of like they sort of reflected that in the Marvel, which I'm kind of surprised by. But Loki essentially causes the destruction of their world, and actually happens in the Norse myth, that he deceives one too many times and makes a mess, and they don't recover and they're all gone. So according to Norse myth, at least according to certain versions of Norse myth, certain stories, they don't exist anymore. So, but the truth is all of these different things, you know, are all kind of jumbled up together. So we have, but you know, much of this is that, we're used to, and we come from, especially the religious side of us comes from much more of a Latin tradition. And the Bible was in Latin for over a millennium before anybody translated it into other languages, even though the majority of the population couldn't speak, read, or understand Latin. And so, but this is really capturing poetry before the Latin influence. So these don't have a lot of Latin words. Our language, though, has been changed a tremendous amount, and much of it is because of history. Because we were taken over by French kings when the Normans conquered England, the French court spoke only Latin and French. And so we ended up acquiring a ton of words in Latin and French. And then we had what was called the Great Vowel Shift. And so you're going to hear some vowels that are kind of weird when I read it, but that's because things have changed. No, I would guess that it's more like 70% of English vocabulary is Germanic. But the truth is, I don't think 70% of English vocabulary is from any one source. In the United States, we use a lot of words that are Native American. We are the most, and I'm going to type this in here, the word, because it's a very weird word, but it's the only one that works. We are an acquisitive language, which means we like acquiring new words. The French don't like acquiring new words. In fact, they're still kind of irritated that le tennis is an English word that they've made into French. They don't like that. They like using only French words. And but English speakers don't. We love new words, and Americans especially just will acquire anything. We have so many words in our language just in the last decade that come from Japanese influences, especially because of young people reading manga and watching anime. In fact, even the terms manga and anime are they're completely taken from Japanese culture. So so many things that we use, we don't know where they necessarily come from, but they come from all different influences. And our language will continue to change. We will have words that fall out of the language, and there are words that will come into the language. The only thing that really shifted in this, and where Latin had the most influence, is that certain letters that were used commonly in Old English get to the point where they're no longer used. So this Yebideth, it's a G, but it's Yebideth. And notice how it's bead. It's not Yebideth. There's no I sound in Old English. That's before the Great Vowel Shift. Everything will elongate with the Great Vowel Shift. So Yebideth, that D looking thing with a little cross, is a th sound. But it's the same thing here. That is a th sound. Thea. Thea Thehemodkereg. And that's actually, if you have any equivalents to what we listen to today, look at Elven speech and other languages in The Lord of the Rings, because J.R.R. Tolkien was a medieval scholar, and he patterned much of the speech of the different other groups after this Old English and other old languages. And so that's one reason why if you listen to the elves speak, there's so many th, because they did the same thing in Old English. But there's certainly some words that you can get immediately. Oft is just often. Then him it's him. It's him. It's not. They don't have the short I. Him. It's him. And then R is exactly the same. And then they, that, hey, but a lot of the pronouns are going to be very similar. And then long, obviously, it would be spelled, it would be long. They pronounced everything. So it's kind of like Spanish, where they pronounce everything. There's nothing that's and their I is a little different than it used to be. So each is how that's pronounced, but it's just I. Oft, I, should. See, it's shalled. But the more you do it, and soi is really so. so quoth quath erdstatha, and that's essentially the well, here's erfefa, erfetha. I almost said it wrong, but it's and that's the dig is ding, so it's yaminding, yaminding. Is that how it's pronounced in there? But it's and beeth is it's like, let me see if I can, beeth, like beest or something like that. It's a different form of be. But the truth is there's a lot in here. So niece new is just nothing now. You see mine, so that's a pronoun that's allowed, but the truth is the more you read this, the more you're going to get it. Like, so we actually translated in one of my classes all of Beowulf, and it took the semester, but it got easier and easier and easier as you went along. So, and same things, I mean, there's like that is just that over and over. That is in, see, so that beeth en eorle indrichten theo. So you're probably going to, the more people look at this, the more they're going to go, wow, I totally, okay, so now we have things like and this is where we get German. So German words, a lot of German words would take one word and another word and then just put them together. So in this, the Breuskofen is a man coffin. It's a coffin where you go inside. Bindeth fast. And so they usually in Old English, they start with the noun and then they do the verb, but they do it differently. Like it's the noun that is the subject of the verb, that is the object of the verb. So in her or his breast coffin bindeth fast. So bindeth fast into the coffin. So with death and everything, they go and end up in a coffin. So it's a lot of it you have to, and so many people, and I'm really proud of them, but so many people realized that the words were in different order. And that you can't do that if you don't recognize the words. So that's really good. But the truth is even that sound, if I just read these words, they sound different and there's a rhythm that's different. And there are also one thing, they don't really have rhyme in Old English. What they do have though is alliteration. And we've talked about that before. What is alliteration?
It's sort of where you have the same sounds.
Yes, it is repetition, and it can be consonants, which is the repetition of consonant sounds like T's and F's and S's, or it can be assonance, and that's the repetition of vowel sounds. So it could literally be an A, different words all with A in them, the same A sound. And so you can see though, even just looking at it. So this line right here, for instance, held his Horkofen Hitch. So the truth is it's got 4 H's just in one line. The next one is weird withstanden. So withstanding fate. Weird withstanden. But they even have werig. So 1, 2, 3 W's. The next line, Reohige helpe. So 3 H's in a row. And the next one is derigde. So 2 D's. And that's pretty much every single line. Brestkofen bindet. Modsefen minne. So it even here, earncherig. So we've done all these lines in a row. Efle. 2 E's. And the next one is freumagum feor feterum. And it's just, that's the way that they did it. So tons. Yes, kennings are also, they actually use, some of them are in here, like breast coffin is really I mean, you could say it's a coffin today, but yes, that's actually, Whale Road is in Beowulf. It's repeated several times in Beowulf, but it's also other
Cool.
things. And even heroes, even Beowulf is not, it is his name, and yet we don't know that it's really his name, because what it technically means is either bear wolf or man wolf, or both, or kind of a mixture of both. But it's like his name is Beowulf, almost like a Native American running deer or something, but it's it's even that is, and he's often described, and actually this is a common trope even in Iliad and Odyssey. Instead of describing the name, they give him a title, like killer of warriors, or um, after once he kills Grendel in Beowulf, then they call him Grendel's killer. And that happens a lot. Well, but Grendel's killer, da 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 da, even though he's in a different battle. And so that's very typical. And they also, because of German puts two words together all the time anyway. And so this is just more of that patterning because it's a Germanic language. Because English is not Latin based. It is,
No.
many other languages are. I mean, most of the ones we study, like Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Romanian, those are all Latinate languages. But Germanic languages, obviously, German is Germanic, but that includes Icelandic, it includes Norwegian, it includes Finnish. So a lot of different, you're gonna hear, I mean, even later Norwegians had an effect on our language because they settled up in the northern parts near Scotland and stuff like that. We also had influence from the Celtic and Gaelic languages, which are not related to the Germanics. And then when we moved here to the United States, then we had a bunch of influence from different Native American populations. So that's just the way it is. So, but it's, what's cool is if you can find somebody to read this, you can hear, in fact, like when I do Beowulf, I usually read part of Beowulf. And honestly, the best part to read of Beowulf in its original is the battle scenes. Because instead of the bones broke, he broke his bones, which is, it's okay. It's the banas to braken, and it's just so different. It sounds mean and angry. But it's just so, it has a power and a rhythm that we can't emulate today in our regular one, if that makes sense. So even though I'm not going to I'm not going to give you Old English in case any of you guys are watching this video, and please do watch them. Some of the videos, it's funny, have like 10 views, which is not very many, but at least somebody's watching it. Other ones have none or one. So people aren't watching them, and hopefully they do before they take the test. So I will put that out again saying, please watch the videos, y'all. I know they're long, but it's so much better to do that because you're going to get stuff. But I'm not going to give you a passage in Old English and say, translate this. Nope. Nope. That's too much to ask. But there are even a few things. I didn't even notice this. There's of course gold, which is absolutely the same. But as you go through, though, you're going to see this kind of thing. The more you get used to this, the more it's going to be easy for you. And I don't think you're ever going to take an Old English class, but I so enjoyed mine. And even history of the English language, which you also don't have to take unless you're an English major. I took it as an undergrad, loved it, and then tried to opt out of it in my graduate school, and I decided to take it again because I really liked the teacher. I met with her, and by the end of the meeting, she was ready to give me a sign off, so I didn't have to take it, and I took it because it seemed, and I got so much more out of it. It's just one of those. It's cool to know where we came from. This is how we used to talk for real. And so, even this one, look how many B's there are, 3 B's. And then before there's a beforen, which is before, which is really funny. But I just think I love language in general. So this kind of stuff is fun. Hopefully it wasn't too much of an issue for everybody else. Now let's talk about what it's about. And this talks about a little bit, this reveals a bit about Germanic culture because Germanic tribes were very tribal. They didn't have an overriding king that was over like a whole country or something like that. They were very territorial, and it was very easy for one tribe to war with another tribe. If one tribe out hunting or whatever killed the member of another tribe, then they'd essentially have to give them weirgild, or pay, like, it's called man price weirgild, but it's just, or man gold, but it's how much was the person worth. And if they don't pay them, then they start a feud, and literally tribes would kill each other off and would end up gone because they would be at war for so long. It's kind of like, the Gaza Strip today. It's horrible. And yet everything depended on, well, it's probably more like wir is usually the spelling. Wir Geld. Wir Geld. And so how defending the tribe was of utmost importance. You had to, and that's where we kind of get, this is a lot where we get feudalism, because you owe absolute allegiance to whoever the chief of the tribe is. Or it's kind of like, if you know anything about Scottish clans, it's very much like that, where you have to swear fealty to the clan leader, the laird. And
Yeah.
and that's your job. And if you prove yourself unfaithful, like you betray the laird, you're going to be cast out. And this is what a lot of people who have studied these poems, especially in Old English, say has happened to the wanderer. His tribe has been all killed, like it's been annihilated and he's the only survivor, or he has been kicked out. And if you were kicked out of a tribe, you had nowhere to go, because every other tribe around you was an enemy. No one would trust you. And so it was, being cast out, being evicted or expelled from the tribe was a death sentence. It was not likely that you were going to be able to survive on your own unless you were really good at killing. And because a whole tribe could go after you, and no tribe was going to accept you because you were part of their enemy tribes. So there's no way that you were gonna you were probably it was you were probably gonna be to just be dead. But it was highly isolating. If you lost your tribe, if your tribe all were defeated, and then it was just you alone, it's a horrible place to be. And the wanderer, even though it's dealing with the physical reality of isolation, it really speaks to a lot of people, even today, about the feeling of isolation. I've had kind of elderly students, people who are in their 60s and 70s, taking this class just for fun because they like learning, and they've said, this reminds me, it makes me think of all the people that I graduated from high school with, and how many have died and things like that. And so it's a haunting poem, whether you read it in Old English or if you read it in its translation. And there, if you don't love this translation, you can always find other ones, because I bet you could find 100 different versions just online of people who translated this. The Poetry Foundation tends to be they have good translations. Um, and they also provide all this stuff for free, which is also good. So it's probably, compared to some of the others, but you can just find one that you really like. I know with Iliad and Odyssey, I had to find, my favorite is Fagel's. Can't remember his first name, but Fagel's translation of both is my favorite of the Iliad and Odyssey. It's so much more. It really reflects the poetry and the style and everything. I can't see his name from here, and I don't want to take off the mic, but it definitely, I'll have somebody say, well, I don't know what I think. Always read, read the best translation you can. And so, but in this one, what exactly is he talking about? So it's third person, where there's a narrator, and that's how the poem starts out. And it even talks about, well, and one thing too that they definitely believed is that your fate was your fate. If you were fated to die, then you were just going to die. And that's actually a very much a Greek concept, even though they really didn't have access to Greek ideas. So, they didn't have Greek literature that they took up north with them. Greek and Roman literature really didn't, come out and get read widely until the Renaissance. It was one of the things that started the rebirth, the Renaissance, is that people had access to, if not the originals, they had access to translations of the Greek and Roman, the ancient Greek and Roman literature. And so, but it starts out talking about this, and it even says the wanderer, he's not named, So he is just the wanderer. And he's mindful of troubles, of cruel slaughters, and dear kinsman's downfall. So this suggests that he has lost his people. And he's haunted by how many of them have died. And he is now telling his kind of like sad story. Mostly, though, he doesn't tell a tremendous amount of, like, it's not a narrative poem. It's much more of what it feels like to have lost everyone. And that's why one reason I think it fits, like it transfers better to our time period, because we know, even if we don't have physical isolation, that we did during COVID. In fact, I had not read this in a while, and I read it while we were quarantined for COVID, and I thought, this feels so normal right now. I totally it resonated in a way that honestly it really hadn't before for me. So he says, he's often alone in the first light of dawn. I have sung my lament. There is none living to whom I would dare to reveal clearly my heart's thoughts. In other words, I don't have anybody that I can truly talk to. And I know that it's in our nature, it's a nobleman's lordly nature. This is that's not really what the Old English said. And I don't want to go back and forth too much because it's going to freak people out, but it's not really a noble, because I mean, it's like an earl. I think that's where we get the earl. We know what an earl is. No, we don't have earls in the United States, but an earl was a type of lord. It's one of the ranks in Europe, but it was one of the earliest ranks, and that it was even known. I mean, the word was even used almost like laird and earl were both kind of interchangeable. So the leader of the tribe would be the earl. But it's normal. Like, this is our nature, to closely bind his spirit's coffer, hold fast his treasure hoard, whatever he may think. In other words, it's not typical. It's not in our nature to talk about our troubles openly. Normally, we keep our thoughts to ourselves. Maybe he's saying it's a guy thing, that it's normal that we don't complain. And it says, the weary mind cannot withstand fate, the troubled heart. And again, fate, this time fate is not capitalized. So remember, he decides, he left it, as at the beginning of the sentence, but it's not, it really is dealing with fate. Well, that's what we're talking about. Fate, destiny, fortune, you could think about it that way. But it can't withstand fate. The troubled heart can offer no help. And so those eager for fame often bind fast in their breast coffers to a sorrowing soul, just as I have had to take my own heart. Now, this is a very long sentence, but he's just kind of meandering through the ideas of, the and certainly part of the mystique back then, and it was in Beowulf, definitely. You go in and you're brave and you fight off things and you defeat other tribes and you get their gold. You actually win treasure. And that's very similar to even in the Iliad and the Odyssey. There's a lord, there's somebody in charge. In the Iliad, it was Agamemnon. He was the general over all of the armies. But when they defeat a town and sack it and bring all the treasure back, he would mete out the treasure. That's typically what happens in this tribal community too. The lord is the one who decides who fought the best, who gets the best, the most gold, and he metes out the presents. So after Beowulf, for instance, defeated Grendel, then he was given a bunch of gifts by Hrothgar, the king. And if the king hadn't given gifts, if he wasn't generous, well, then he will lose the loyalty of the people around him because he's not willing to pay for it. So, often wretched, cut off from my own homeland. So he's not even in the place where he used to live, far from dear kinsmen. So, and he's even said, he says, just as I have had to take my own heart, which is cut off and bind it in fetters. Now, this is not realistic. He's not taking his heart and like wrapping it up. He's figuratively doing that. He's not talking. He's trying not to think about the sorrow. He's trying to, kind of wall it off. You know how you compartmentalize and just tuck it away so you don't, because you're not supposed to do that. But then it even says, ever since long ago I hid my gold-giving friend in the darkness of earth and went wretched, winter sad, over the ice-locked waves, sought sick a treasure giver wherever I might find far or near. Now we're going to stick to that because it keeps on going. This is still one sentence. But he says, essentially, I've kind of tucked my heart away and tucked all my pain with it ever since I buried my friend. So I hid my gold-giving friend in the darkness of earth. I dug a grave and put him in it and went wretched. So I left that grave, winter sad, over the ice-locked waves, and I tried to find a treasure giver. That's another Lord. That's one of those, like the whale road, a treasure giver.
Yeah.
So it's yet another one of those. And he's trying to find another Lord to serve. Wherever I might find him, far or near, someone in a mead hall who might know my people, or who would want to comfort me, friendless, accustom me to joy. So in other words, I've lost all my people, and I'm trying to find another place to be, where I can be welcome, where I can serve a Lord and go back to the life I've known, where I had people. And yet he didn't find that. So, and this is again, he essentially a person is what he means, like one. He who has come to know how cruel a companion is sorrow for one with few dear friends will understand. So if you know what it's like to not have any friends, you get what I mean. The path of exile claims him, not patterned gold, a winter-bound spirit, not the wealth of earth. He's cold and alone and isolated and bereft. He remembers hall holders and treasure caking, how in his youth his gold-giving Lord accustomed him to the feast. That joy has all faded. So he remembers how the good old days, but it's all gone. So does that all make sense? Did you? And a lot of people got it. They understood what they're just like. He's just lamenting because he doesn't have a Lord to serve anymore. He has no people. They're all gone.
Yeah. One thing I was curious about, what does it mean with the treasure caking?
The treasure caking. Well, let's look back at let's see. I always go back to the original. I have to go back and figure out which line it is. So they don't number lines, and it makes me so sad. Because I don't know that it doesn't have the spaces like he did.
Yeah.
I have to figure out. Okay, where his heart has been. He remembers. Okay, let's see if I can find it. I'll have to find it because I'm not sure. I'd have to go back. I think I've gone too far. There's something. Yeah, because it's later. Yeah, there, and this is wrong. That's a typo. Okay, so that's where that is. I'm going backwards. And so it's probably, yeah, he's totally retranslated all of this. So let's see what he knew. Wherein reclast Wunden gold. Making sure I'm in the right place. Yeah, not patterned gold. Nails Wunden gold. Wound. That's probably the equivalent. Nor wound gold, not wound gold. Berthloka Freurig. Berthloka. I need to see if I had I should have brought my dictionary with me. But see, that's not, neither one of them really looks like that. Wenera Towista. Yeah, that's gold giving lord. So that's what it reads. Celesecas and Sinkveg. Let me look it up. And I'm gonna take a picture of this one and I'll look it up and I'll text it to you.
Thank
Well, I'll
you.
just send you an email. And if I don't, then remind me and I'll tell you. I can tell you this afternoon, actually, probably. I should be able to go home for lunch.
Thank you.
And I'll make sure I've got both parts so that I can tell you exactly what that is. Because treasure caking it's probably more like treasure adding to, like piling up the treasure,
Yeah.
because that's what they did. I mean, essentially, like Beowulf, when he died, well, he was dying at the end of I mean, he's like 100 years old practically, and he was fighting a dragon. And when he was stabbed in the neck, the one thing he asked is, can you take me out to see the treasure? So that's what he did. He went out and looked at the treasure and, ooh, that's really nice treasure. And then he died. But that's like what you're fighting for, that and glory. And so, that's what you remember. You remember the gifts, the things that you got as reward for what. I mean, it's a very simplistic way of looking at the world. Um, but some people still look at the world that way. How much money can you acquire? So, and do you want to make it into, gold handled, cars and stuff like that? What's your status, I guess. So that still kind of happens to some people, but not Buddhists, but, other people. Yeah, these people were not Buddhists. Okay, so, essentially, he just goes through, the remembering a lot of the different things, what he used to have, and they're all gone. But most of it is a repetition of a pattern. So we used to have this, and then they're gone. So even like he's remembering his kinsmen, he greets them with great joy, almost like they're in his head. Greedily surveys hall companions. They always swim away. The floating spirits bring too few familiar voices. So it's like he's back in that past and he's glorying in it, and then it's gone. And it's just a reminder over and over and over and over of all he's lost. And even this word Middle Earth, which is in the original, it's in a form, but that reminds me, of course, of the Hobbit, and everybody
Yeah.
lives in Middle Earth. So it's essentially it's a lament, and it's something that's not going to end. Like, it doesn't end happily, like, oh, and then he finds his Lord. No, he's lost it, and everything is temporal. It becomes almost like he says, the wine halls topple, their rulers lie deprived of all joys. They're dead. The proud old troops are all fell by the wall. War carried off some, and this is actually a cool place, to talk about, because where is it? Man, I wish these things were numbered. But he's essentially saying everybody's going to die in some way, and that's what happened. War carried off some, so some died in battle, sent them on their way. One a bird carried off over the high seas. Of course, that's, more the mythic stuff. One the gray wolf shared with death, so in other words, he ate him. And one a sad-faced man covered in an earthen grave. That's the person he buried. And everything that was here is gone. The creator, and he sees it as, of course, this is probably this may be a religious interjection, because remember, most of these poems would have and writings would have been written down by scribes who were Catholic, monks, priests, nuns, stuff like that. So, but essentially, he says the creator of men thus destroyed this. So it was like God's will that this all was over. Um, and he again, I mean, the lament goes on. It's a pretty long poem, but he's just grieving. It's a grieving poem. A storm of spears took away the warriors' bloodthirsty weapons. Weird the mighty again, we have fate. And storms battle these stone walls, frost falling. You can almost hear, though, I mean, this feels like the Iliad. It feels like any war. You've lost so many of your companions, so many of your fellow soldiers, and you're in this war-torn place that's just breaking apart because of all of the things that, the bombs that have dropped and everything else. And everything's just, and it's all aligned with these images of winter all the way through. And he comes back again, and every single section of this poem has these images. But here's frost falling, binds up the earth, the howl of winter when blackness comes. And the truth is winter, we have things like Yule and Winterfest and things like those pagan traditions, but they're all because, I mean, winter was a hard place, especially the more north you went in Europe. But anywhere you are where, the crops stop growing, you harvest and you just hope that what you've harvested gets you through the winter. Did you chop enough, logs for the fire so that you can keep warm and you're not going to freeze to death? Did you make enough, did you store enough food so that you're not going to starve to death? And there was always that it was that last little festival where you get all your stuff together, have a feast, with pumpkin pie and so on. But you do all that in essentially knowing that you weren't going to have a feast for the next 3 months, and maybe longer, until the first crop starts coming out. You have to depend on all the food you've stored. So it's that time of bleakness really fits with how he feels now. Everything's gone. And so he's in winter, only his winter is not going to end. There's not spring coming. It's all gone. Here, wealth is fleeting, friends are fleeting, man is fleeting, woman is fleeting. All the framework of this earth will stand empty. Everyone will die. It is about as depressing a poem as you can but again, why would he not say that if he's lost everything? So, and honestly, sometimes wallowing a bit is okay. One has to grieve. And so said the wise one. Now we're back to the narrator, sitting apart in meditation. He is good who keeps his word, and the man who never, some of this may be a little posturing with the scribe too. But he is good who keeps his word, and the man who never too quickly shows the anger in his breast, unless he already knows the remedy a noble man can bravely bring about. It will be well for one who seeks consolation from the Father in heaven. Because remember, these were pagans. So this was definitely an addition here. There are a couple of places in Beowulf where they describe Grendel as the spawn of Cain. And so that's very much a early biblical reference. So it's an allusion to the very first book of Genesis, where Cain kills Abel. And so Cain goes off on his own, journeys off and marries and stuff like that. Who he married, I have no idea, because we haven't figured that one out. But for a lot of people, for a lot of believers, the tradition is that the people of Cain are different, that he's marked. Remember, he was supposed to have something marked, by God to show that he'd done what he did, and he was kind of fallen or something. And so a lot of people, the assumption was, well, who's the race of Cain? Well, in this particular in Beowulf, it was Grendel. He became Grendel's kin became monsters. But that's probably an addition because of the scribes put it in. because the pagans wouldn't have any reference to Cain. Yeah, in the land of wandering. So yeah, but the truth is all of these different references. I mean, this one is one reason I had you guys do this one, even though it's depressing, is it so encapsulates the idea of what do you do when all of the life you have known, all of the friends you have known, all of the family that you've been around, when you are essentially isolated, most of them are gone, and the rest you can't get to, like you're geographically separated from them. But the truth is does loneliness and does isolation have to be physical?
No.
No, you can be surrounded by people and be alone. And I think COVID kind of brought that out, what it feels like to be physically isolated. And yet we have a lot of psychological isolation, and it's not good for us. It's very much not good for us, being isolated. Even if we have like social media and stuff like that, that's actually creates more of a sense of isolation and not less. And it's actually pretty destructive to our mental health, because we're not it helps to be physically in a room with somebody. Even what you and I are doing now is of course it's better than me just chatting back and forth and us typing, or turning in an assignment and then I grade it and give you feedback. But it's still isolating. What would be best? What would be the ideal way for all of us to be learning, for all of these, the 40 whatever people in this class to be in a big classroom together? And
Yeah.
but we don't, first of all, we don't even have, I mean, unless we were in the auditorium, we wouldn't have a classroom big enough. And because so many people are coming from all different places, I have somebody, I think the farthest I have is somebody in Oklahoma taking this class.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And so, and I've had people, I actually had one person who was in the Middle East and he had to take his tests. He had to get, we had to translate all the hours so he knew when things were due. And he ended up just he just turned them all in early so he could make sure he turned them in on time. But he was almost, I think he was like 11 hours different.
Oh,
And so that, that kind of stuff, obviously he wasn't going to, most of the chats were at, 2 in the morning or something like that for him, and it just wasn't going to work. But that kind of distance makes it impossible. And yet there are ways. I mean, obviously we have video chats and things like that that make it so people can see each other. We also, I mean, even this though is better interaction and more real interaction than just, writing back and forth to each other, or texting. And yet the majority of our communication with other people is not direct, not anymore. And that has an effect on us too. In this case, though, of course, this is the time way back with the Wanderer, there were no cell phones, there were no telephones, there were no, there was no fast way to get anywhere. Honestly, I always imagine the Wanderer just walking
yeah.
and having nothing with him, maybe having a weapon or something, but that's it. And he's just lamenting all that he had once. But even, I mean, they lived in pretty uh, rudimentary situations. They didn't have any of the castles yet. This was too early for that. But they would have had kind of, a lot of them would be nomadic as well. So their tribe would just move from place to place, kind of following the animals, following the herds of wild beasts that they would be eating, and the crop rotate, where were the crops, where was food growing. And they'd go south for, if they could, for winter, and then go back north again when it got warmer. But it's still a very nomadic, impermanent situation. And that really, the impermanence of this, it moves beyond this wanderer to our situation. It is temporal. We don't have forever. We're not immortal. So this even goes back. I mean, there's so many other ancient texts that really deal with that lack, the fact that we are going to die and we have no choice. So on that super positive, happy note, we're all going to die and life is short and temporal. Okay, great. But that's kind of where this goes. So this afternoon's chat, whether you come or not, I know you have your aunt coming, so it's
Oh,
totally
I'll be
fine.
here.
Okay.
I'm coming.
Okay. Well, I appreciate
You
that.
can't
But
stop me.
we'll talk about the actual paper tonight though. So it probably won't be a super long session. Well, it'll be as long as it takes for me to kind of go through what you need to do. Okay?
Alrighty.
Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for having me.
See you tonight.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.